catastrophe preparing itself high on the slopes of Mount Semeru. At dawn, the air felt cool, the clouds hung low, and the early monsoon drizzle fell with the harmless rhythm people had grown accustomed to during this time of year. Villagers in Sumberwuluh, Sumber Langsep, Jugosari, and the smaller hamlets scattered along the Besuk Kobokan River woke to what seemed like nothing more than another rainy morning. Children played under roofs, women swept porches wet with mist, and farmers walked into the fields, unaware that the earth above them was slowly becoming a ticking bomb. The rain intensified as the morning progressed, but no one panicked. Rain was as common as the volcanic ash that drifted through their skies each month. What they could not see was the transformation happening deep within the ravines carved into Semeru's unstable slopes. Water seeped relentlessly into the fresh deposits of ash and pyroclastic debris left by recent eruptions. These masses, dormant but fragile, absorbed the rainfall like a sponge until the weight became too much. The ash turned to slurry, gravel loosened, clay softened, and hidden cracks widened, creating a massive body of mud and volcanic debris ready to break free. By mid-morning, monitoring instruments detected the earliest signs: subtle tremors, shifts of material far from the villages, just enough to catch the attention of volcanologists but not enough to alarm the public. The villagers' first warning came not from scientists but from a sound. A low rumble, quiet at first, blending with thunder and rainfall. But with each passing minute, it deepened, growing into a long, resonant growl that vibrated through the ground. People looked up from their chores, conversation stopped. A strange silence fell between bursts of rain as villagers strained to identify the unsettling noise rolling through the valley. The moment fear replaced uncertainty came without warning. A farmer near the Besuk Kobokan River shouted for help before sprinting back toward the houses. The river was rising not gradually, but violently, as if something monstrous had been unleashed upstream. The water's color had shifted from brown to a dark, metallic gray. It wasn't water rushing toward them. It was a wall of sludge. In a matter of minutes, the river transformed into a furious torrent of lahar volcanic mud thick as wet cement, mixed with boulders, tree trunks, ash, and fragments of old lava. It roared down the riverbed like a living creature, wiping out everything it touched. Windows rattled. The ground shook with every collision of rock against rock. People close to the banks ran without looking back, shouting warnings as they went. In Jugosari, the lahar struck the Limpus Bridge, the only lifeline connecting Sumber Langsep to the rest of the village. The torrent smashed into its foundations with explosive force. The bridge shuddered as its supports eroded. Cracks shot across its surface like lightning. Within seconds, the entire structure collapsed into the river and vanished beneath the swirling mass of volcanic mud. Gasps and screams erupted from both sides of the river. Families found themselves stranded just meters apart, separated by a boiling island current they could not cross. The collapse of the bridge was not just a structural failure, it symbolized the sudden isolation of an entire community. Inside Sumber Langsep, chaos unfolded with terrifying speed. The lahar burst over the riverbanks and surged into the village, flooding homes, ripping through walls, and filling rooms with heavy mud. Furniture was swept up like driftwood. Chickens scrambled onto rooftops, bleeding goats slipped in the sludge, and cows cried out as their pens filled. Parents carried children through waist-deep mud, shouting above the roar of the flood. People clung to bamboo poles for balance as they navigated the churning debris. Then the electricity died. Lights flickered once, twice, and then darkness swallowed the village. Without power, the only illumination came from flashlights, phone screens, and the occasional flash of lightning. Fear multiplied. People could no longer see the lahar's destructive path, they could only hear it. The grinding of rocks, the snapping of trees, the rumbling beneath their feet, the distant cries of neighbors trapped in collapsed homes. Villagers moved together instinctively, pulling one another toward higher ground, forming human chains, lifting children onto their shoulders. On the opposite side of the destroyed bridge, Jugosari residents attempted to help, shouting across the muddy chasm, shining lights, trying to throw ropes that fell short each time. They could do nothing but watch the disaster unfold, powerless to reach friends and relatives stranded in the darkness. The rain continued without pause. All night, it fed the lahar, creating new waves of destruction. On the upper slopes of Semeru, additional ash layers destabilized, sending secondary flows into side ravines that eventually joined the main surge. By dawn, the fields that had been the pride of local farmers' rice terraces, chili plantations, fruit trees lay buried beneath a suffocating blanket of ash and mud. When daylight finally arrived, it revealed a changed landscape. A thick fog covered the valley. The air smelled of sulfur and wet earth. Steam drifted from the riverbanks where hot volcanic material met the cool morning air. Entire sections of the river had been reshaped. Houses stood sunken in mud. Roads were gouged open. Livestock was missing. People walked silently through the devastation, some searching for belongings, others simply staring in disbelief. Rescue teams reached the site but were stopped by the destroyed bridge and unstable ground. Heavy machinery attempted to carve alternative paths but struggled against the constant flow of mud. Engineers warned that no vehicle could safely pass. Supplies had to be carried in by volunteers, passed hand to hand across dangerous terrain. In Sumber Langsep, the highest hill became an improvised evacuation center. Families huddled under tarps, sharing blankets and food. Children cried. Elderly residents prayed. Everyone waited for updates, hoping the rain would finally stop. Volunteers formed teams to distribute food, water, and warm clothing. Teenagers carried buckets of clean water from community wells. Even families who had lost homes helped others salvage items from the mud. Authorities warned that the disaster was far from over. Semeru was still active, and each eruption increased the likelihood of more lahars if rain persisted. Residents were urged to avoid river channels, but the emotional toll of leaving their homes weighed heavily. Many stared at the mud-filled remains of their houses, feeling torn between grief, fear, and determination. Over the following days, cleanup efforts slowly began. Villagers and responders worked together, clearing mud from doorways, excavating lost tools, and trying to restore access paths. It was exhausting work, often undone by new rainfall that sent fresh waves of sludge into cleared areas. Still, no one gave up. The community refused to let the lahar define them. Semeru stood in the background, its summit hidden in clouds, seemingly calm yet undeniably powerful. The mountain had shaped their land, fed their farms, and threatened their lives all at once. But even in the face of such immense natural forces, the villagers' resilience shone brighter. Strangers became rescuers, neighbors became lifelines. Children became symbols of hope as they helped carry small buckets of mud, trying to rebuild their world one handful at a time. The lahar of December 5, 2025, will be remembered not only for the destruction it caused but for the strength it revealed. A night when the river roared like a beast, when the sky fell into darkness, when bridges collapsed and homes vanished beneath mud, and yet people stood together, fought together, survived together. It was a disaster that scarred the land but awakened an extraordinary spirit of unity in Lumajang, a reminder that even when nature unleashes its darkest force, the human heart refuses to be defeated. As the hours passed, the villagers of Lumajang faced a relentless reminder that the forces of nature were indifferent to human concerns. Every movement of the lahar carried new dangers. Even as the first wave receded slightly, smaller tributaries of the Besuk Kobokan River began to swell with runoff, fed by the continuous downpour higher on Semeru's slopes. From above, the mountain seemed to simmer, its peak hidden in a dense, swirling cloud of ash and smoke. Occasionally, a bright flare illuminated the cloud from within, a distant reminder that the volcano's heart was far from dormant. The villagers, already exhausted from the initial onslaught, now had to contend with the knowledge that more might come. Children, some as young as 6 or 7, clung to their parents, their wide eyes reflecting the gray sludge that covered every street and yard. The air was thick with moisture and ash, carrying a choking, metallic scent that made every breath a struggle. Every inhalation seemed to mix the sharp tang of sulfur with the bitter taste of wet earth and crushed vegetation. The village's dogs whimpered, huddling under debris and overturned carts, while the occasional goat bleated in confusion and fear. Even the birds seemed to have vanished, leaving the sky eerily silent except for the low rumble of Semeru and the relentless patter of rain. The villagers' attempts to communicate with neighboring settlements were hampered not only by the destroyed bridge but also by spotty telecommunications. Mobile networks were down in key areas, leaving many residents dependent on runners' neighbors brave enough to navigate the shifting mud, exposed tree roots, and hidden fissures to relay messages. One young man, slipping repeatedly on the mud-covered slope, carried news of trapped families to Jugosari. His soaked clothes weighed him down, his shoes nearly lost in thick layers of volcanic debris, but his determination carried him forward. Each step was a calculated risk. One misstep could mean being pulled into the moving sludge that still surged unpredictably from tributary channels. As night fell, the darkness brought a new kind of terror. The thick ash clouds above prevented any natural moonlight from illuminating the area. The only sources of light were flashlights and torches carried by rescue teams, their beams cutting thin paths through the gray haze. Occasional bursts of lightning revealed the full scale of devastation, trees bent sideways, crushed under mud. Fields unrecognizable under layers of debris. Homes partially collapsed, their roofs sagging with waterlogged mud. Every flicker of light seemed to animate the landscape, turning shadows into giant, monstrous shapes, each seeming to crawl toward the frightened villagers. Inside homes that had survived the initial flow, families worked tirelessly to protect what remained. Mothers formed human chains to remove wet blankets, mattresses, and essential supplies from the mud. Fathers attempted to reinforce walls weakened by water-saturated timber and cracked foundations. Even as they labored, they kept one eye on the river, knowing that any new surge could obliterate their efforts. The interplay of fear and resilience created an atmosphere thick with tension, quiet sobs punctuated by hurried commands, whispered prayers mixing with the frantic sounds of rescue work. Moments of stillness broken by the ominous groan of shifting earth. Volunteers, some local, others from nearby districts, displayed acts of courage that would later become legendary in village lore. One group navigated the treacherous slopes to bring bottled water and blankets to those trapped in partially flooded homes. With each step, the mud threatened to swallow their boots, the smell of wet volcanic material filling their nostrils. They worked in near silence, aware that noise might startle animals, loosen debris, or attract attention to unstable areas.